if we strip away all emotionality from this, and if we just look at the logic, when I say orgasmic experience, I'm talking about ultra-subatomic particle level, particle fission and fusion. But if I keep saying things like electrical positive and electrical negative instead of feminine and masculine, or if I keep using Anuhasi terms such as manu, mane, ire, or urs or ruse, then I'm losing already with that spiritual side. I am losing a certain part of society. If I keep saying things like angular rotation of particle spin, or stored electrical potential, or if I go into numbers, or if I go into the real technical details of the physics of it, I'm going to lose a certain number of people. So I noticed that, and it happens, I've gotten to that point in my professional life that in the beginning, when you say, when you hold non-mainstream ideas and when you keep expressing non-mainstream ideas, in the very beginning, you are just living in your own echo chamber. You are just surrounded by the people who quasi-agree with you, and you circulate those ideas back and forth. Because if you would be surrounded by people who are holding completely opposing views and you have nobody to bounce your ideas back off, you usually give up on that individuation. You usually cave in. If nobody else is supporting you, then you usually, after a certain point, just find yourself being worn down and go with the flow and find a sense of belonging and sacrifice your individuated ideas for the sake of feeling understood or loved or appreciated. So when you grow out of that incubator space of your own echo chamber, of the people who strictly speaking agree with you, which I have come to that point, then you start coming up against ideas, ideologies, people, personalities that are sometimes directly opposing to your perception. Now, I base my not just emotional understanding. I started with the emotional understanding of it. Now I'm basing my logical understanding of it on a 15-dimensional ultra-subatomic particle physics. If I keep saying really hardcore physics terms, then some part of society will just put their hands up, be like, yeah, I don't understand, I don't give a fuck. So I choose as a storyteller, because I love the science, I love the mechanics, I love the psychology of storytelling. I choose storytelling terms, so I anthropomorphize. I use terms like orgasmic experience or masculine, feminine. Now, and some people have an issue with it, and we can come from the purely logical, and I'm a very passionate person. When I fall in love with something or someone, then I use very emotionally charged words. And I flap my hands like this. But that's just me. If we take it down to a reductionist point of view, just pure logic, just say that we are absolute scientific skeptics and nothing exists. We're doubting everything. There is no morality, there's no right or wrong, there's no inherent value added to anything. And your fundamental presupposition is that there is nothing eternal. That's where skeptics are coming from. It's not a metaphysical point of view. The metaphysics states or presupposes that there is something that is inherently eternal, something that consists, that reality consists of something that is unrefutable. That's metaphysics. If we're going from the skeptic's point of view, okay, then everything is up for debate, everything is up for question. It is just a completely random, chaotic sequence of events. We are no more than biological data, sense perception, and how we make judgments or how we make sense of our own perception is completely up to us, is completely random, chaotic, and there's no ruling force in the world. Those are the basic two presuppositions. Now, I stand obviously in the metaphysical realm. And metaphysics has nothing to do with woo-woo. It has nothing to do with whether we believe in something or not. The fundamental rule, the fundamental difference between the two is whether there is something that is real. You don't have to agree on what real is, but there is something that is reality. There is something that is eternal, fundamental. Or you're completely negating that, at which point that's a completely different debate, because you can just say completely arbitrary things such as, well, it's just how the way it is. Well, we just have to agree on that. Well, okay, so there is no argument behind the it's just what it is, because everything is chaotic. You can negate anything and everything. So if you're coming from the negating side, if you're coming from the absolute skeptical side, if you neglect or if you deny the fact, or if you just don't believe in the fact that there is something eternal, that's a completely different argument. I'm willing to have that argument, but not in this setting. So let's presuppose that there is something eternal. Now, from a purely logics point of view, break it down what eternal means. In our understanding of how the world works or how reality works, if something has the quality of being eternal, that's either completely still and motionless, absolutely still and motionless, or has a perpetual movement. Because if movement has momentum, if movement has acceleration, if movement has certain characteristics that would mean that there is a beginning and an end to that movement, then we're not talking about something eternal. So if we're talking about something eternal, then that eternal thing is either completely still or eternally moving, perpetually moving. Now, I'm coming from the side of a quantum understanding, which holds both of the possibilities, each of the possibilities, and none of the possibilities at the same time. To me, that's what the definition of infinity is, that you can have a choice between each, all, or none. If we're looking at reality as a morphogenetic field, which means that let's presuppose that this morphogenetic field, this thing, is the eternal thing. Okay, so look at the morphogenetic field maybe as a blank piece of paper, but that's quite a limiting point of view. So maybe let's say that it's a completely still lake, completely motionless, completely undisturbed, completely undifferentiated, but it has the inherent potential for movement. Now, within that complete stillness, silence, motionlessness, there is no life. Now, life or being in itself is a metaphysical term. We can agree or disagree or debate what life is, what being is, but let's just presuppose that there is something that is alive, that is something that is being. So for that being to be born out of complete stillness and nothingness, there has to be an original disturbance. Okay, so let's disturb that water surface. Now, once we have done that, I'm giving a little metaphysical talk here because I had a bit of a shit week. So let's suppose that we have just disturbed that water surface. Now, if we do that, this morphogenetic undifferentiated field, this is a conscious and sentient field. So it has a substance. That's why I used water instead of a piece of paper. A piece of paper can be understood as something rigid, static, just not responsive. Water has a very responsive quality, which is a lot closer to a quantum understanding of what a morphogenetic field is. If we disturb this morphogenetic field, if we disturb the surface of the water, then you would get movement. That movement has an electromagnetic quality. It has a certain measurable electromagnetic outpicturing. It has qualities such as acceleration, speed, temperature, it has temperature changes, it has changes within its inherent qualities. Once those inherent qualities change, then you've created differentiation within the undifferentiated field of morphogenic field or consciousness. I call it consciousness. If you find that a bit too woo-woo out there, let's call it morphogenic field. So you would have a differentiation between undifferentiated field versus a differentiated substance, a being, something that is alive. In a quantum sense, that is the only difference that exists. Something that is a differentiation versus something that is a non-differentiated field. Because that infinitely small source point of differentiation becomes the source point of a macrocosmic and microcosmic level. I keep messing that up. A macrocosmic and a microcosmic level. That becomes the origin, the point of origin for each and every atom, each and every subatomic particle, each and every galaxy as a whole in its own. Once you have that differentiation, once you have that source of origin, if you don't like the word source, or if you don't like the word God, and I do not like the word God, especially because it comes from the word, the same word as Odin comes from, which we talked about last time, why it's not the nicest thing. So if we don't use the word God, or if we don't use the word source, we can use differentiated or undifferentiated. So a point of differentiation has internal characteristics that separates it from the rest. It has an individuality. It has a personality, because field itself is not just conscious. Conscious means that it's aware. It is aware of nothing else but itself, because there is nothing else but the field itself. So awareness is self-awareness. Consciousness is self-consciousness. So it's that field and the differentiation within the field that is not just conscious, it is also sentient. It doesn't just have an electric outpicturing energy, it also have a magnetic, internally resonating sound vibration quality feeling component. Now, feeling can be a different complexity on a level of atoms and particles versus a cluster of cells, an organ, a limb, or a body of cells, a human being, or any other being. The only differentiation is whether it's a tiny minuscule particle or a massive cluster. Is just purely a level of complexity of data, sensory data. Now, we come to the interpretation of data. That's where metaphysics, for me, has a much more sound logic to it than chaos theory, because based on how our understanding is, we do have different interpretations, different means of translating that data set. And based on our interpretation, we assign value to the outcome of our interpretation. If I say that something holds a value to me, I'm going to keep defending that. If I say that something is not valuable for me, and I'm pretty much a pragmatic person, borderline utilitarian. I moved enough times that if something is not useful for me, then just get out of my life. But I do assign emotional value based on the lifestyle that I'm living. So still, what I hold valuable, what I say that is useful, that is my interpretation. So I understand the point of view that everything is up for interpretation. And at the same time, how we interpret things, that cannot be, as far as I'm concerned, that cannot be void of personality. Your personal individuation within a morphogenetic field will inherently dictate or cloud or color or filter the way you are assigning value to a data set. If you interpret yourself as nothing else but sense perception, there's nothing before birth, there's nothing after death, there's only this, nothing else, then the way you interpret your sense perception, the way that you put together your data set and make some kind of meaning, make some kind of sense, that is still very much dependent on your individuation. I'm only bringing this up because this week I had a couple of those really snarky comments that it's not enough to just talk about orgasms. I'm not going to be for everyone. I am a very eccentric person. I do educate myself in very versatile understandings of the world, very versatile translations of the data set that we're dealing with. But I am opinionated. I have my own style. I have my own individuation. So I do keep saying that the way I interpret things is an anthropomorphized storytelling way of looking at the world. When I say feminine, masculine coming together in an orgasmic union, I'm talking about 15-dimensional ultra-subatomic particle physics. We can use that language. We can debate on that language as well. But if I keep using that language, I am going to lose the people who do not care about that language or who feel intimidated by that language. So I've given myself the role of translating, mediating, bridging the gap, communicating, making connections. I'm studying the heavy stuff so that I'm able to translate it in a way that resonates with people. It's not going to resonate with everyone. But when we come to a critique of personality beyond the data set, beyond the interpretation, that critique against the person who's interpreting, that I believe is coming from the person who is critiquing. Because I'm willing to have an open debate on anything and everything that I say. But when somebody comes at me, and I've had a couple of those this week, when somebody comes at me or at anybody else with an inherent attack without any interaction, any prior interaction, then that attack is, in my understanding, a learned behavior that we keep regurgitating within society, within our families, within our cultures. And I'm very happy that I found a spiritual scientific paradigm that does explain in a very consistent and very coherent way. We're going to go into the victim-victimizer game in, I think, step 10. That game has steps. It has certain psychological profiles, and it has an escalation in steps of what ends up as complete psychological warfare. So the very first imprint, and I have a massive imprint of that, is the loneliness imprint. That's the lowest level of complexity, how you can disturb a human's psyche, self-esteem, self-worth by making them feel lonely, making them feel isolated. And I have a massive imprint of that, and I'm still working on that. The highest complexity is the complete inversion of logical sound-mindedness. It's mirroring the mirroring. You are feigning empathy and leading and pacing. Those are NLP terms, leading and pacing at the same time. So you are not just negating someone's, you're not just gaslighting someone, you're not just negating someone's logical ideology, you're also emotionally, passive-aggressively attacking them. It's very high-level psychological warfare. So this week we had to do some cleaning on aisle 4 because those little buggers just kept bugging and bugging and bugging. And still up to this day, it takes me a little time to, first of all, to admit that I'm committing to this worldview. It's a scientific theory. Einstein's general relativity is being debunked only 100 years after he wrote those things up first. So for now, I've committed to proving that this theory, this 15-dimensional theory, is correct. Worst thing that happened, I will disprove it. Based on this understanding, if I say that I am coming from that original differentiation of an eternal field of sentient consciousness, then anything that has the intention to hurt, harm, attack, destroy, kill, negate is not inherently originating from that source point of origin. When I make the differentiation, it gives me the emotional peace and understanding that I do not have to accept that as my reality. We started on the question of what reality is. So let's breathe.